Voiceover, calm, dramatic, cinematic tone. Imagine this. You're walking along a quiet beach at sunrise and you see a man lying motionless on the sand. He's well dressed, but all the clothing labels are missing. He has no wallet, no name, no past. Just a small, tightly folded piece of paper hidden in his pocket. 2 words are printed on it. Tamam Shud. The end. This is not fiction. This is one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. In the late hours of December 1948, a young woman named Thelma watched her husband leave their home in Adelaide, Australia. It was just another night for him to work his job as a truck driver. But when he didn't return home by morning, she assumed something was wrong. He wasn't even gone that long. She drove to the local police station to report her husband missing and asked them to start looking for him right away. They did. But within a few hours, they called her back to tell her that they found his truck parked on the side of a road leading to a secluded beach just outside of town. She drove over and soon saw what they had discovered inside the back of her husband's truck. It was a man lying on his back, fast asleep, or so it seemed. When she got closer, she realized he wasn't sleeping. He was dead. And while it looked like he might have been there for days, the police would later determine he had actually died just hours before. The discovery happened on a Sunday morning, December, on a stretch of beach that would come to be known as Somerton Beach. It was a strange sight, not just the body of a man lying on the sand, but also his truck, which was parked hundreds of yards away from where he was found. This man's identity would never be uncovered. Neither would the cause of his death. But perhaps most puzzling of all were the secrets stashed in his clothes. What could be more inconspicuous than a dead man on a deserted beach? Well, maybe a dead man on a deserted beach wearing clothes with all the tags removed. That's what the police officers found when they searched the body. Whoever this man was, they had clearly tried to hide their face. And with a close examination of the body, the officers noticed something else. There were no obvious signs of trauma, and the man had no wallet or ID of any kind. This isn't how people were in the habit of traveling in 1948. So who was this person? How did they get to the beach and why? And did it matter anyway? The first lead came from the man's appearance. He was between 40 and 50 years old and about 5 feet 11 inches tall. He wore a suit and tie, a hat and gloves, a belt, and shiny dress shoes, which were all clean and unmuddied, suggesting he had recently left home. He had dark hair, which was balding on top but still fairly thick on the sides. And while it's difficult to know for sure, because the man had been dead for some time, he probably had brown eyes. This was based on what's known as the almond test, which describes how the shape of one's eyelids can reveal their eye color. If the eyelid follows the natural curvature of the eye, exposing the iris around it, the person likely has dark eyes. If the eyelid covers most of the eye, then the person likely has light-colored eyes. Because the man's eyes were almost completely covered by his eyelids, they were probably brown. And lastly, his fingerprints revealed that he was a smoker. But these were hardly things that could help identify him, and the police were forced to turn to the public for help. On December, they released a statement saying that the man found on Somerton Beach was unidentified and that an investigation into his death was ongoing. By January, they received word from a local doctor that he believed the man had been a patient of his several months prior. According to the physician, the man had complained of stomach pain and stayed for 2 nights at the clinic, during which time he used the alias Carl Webb. But this was hardly a major breakthrough. Not only was this man using a fake name, but the doctor couldn't even confirm that it was spelled C-A-R-L-W-E-B-B, or if it was pronounced Carl, Cork, Carl, Kirk, Corey, Kurt, Kerr, Carrie, or Caleb. What the police really needed was a photo, and luckily they had one. On January 11, 1949, they distributed a picture of the man to the public. A month later, someone came forward to say that they recognized the stranger. According to a woman who contacted the police, she had seen the same man standing next to a car in a train station parking lot. The man had asked her for directions to his car, which she helped him find. Then he got in and drove off. But because she hadn't really paid attention at the time, all she could recall was that his car was maroon or burgundy in color. And while that description was helpful, the lack of other details meant the lead went nowhere. Meanwhile, other leads continued to appear, including one from a taxi driver who picked up a man matching the Somerton man's description. He took him from the train station to a hotel, after which he was never seen again. But none of these leads panned out, leaving investigators empty-handed. Except for one thing. While the police were taking measurements of the beach where the body was found, a newspaper boy walked across the sand and handed the lead investigator a small package. Inside was a book, specifically a copy of The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, which is a collection of poems written by a Persian poet. At first glance, it appeared to be a normal book, except for the fact that several pages were missing. When the officer opened it, he noticed that the remaining pages contained cryptic markings, numbers, and symbols. After some digging, they learned that the missing pages may have contained an important message. The markings and symbols were eventually translated from Persian and revealed a series of coordinates, plus what appeared to be a telephone number written in a cipher. Unfortunately, the phone number wasn't much use to the police since they didn't know what the symbols stood for. But one thing caught the attention of a journalist named John Wool, the letter T, which when flipped upside down looked exactly like the letter L. What if the symbols were simply substitutes for the letters of the alphabet? In this scenario, T would stand for T, A for B, M for C, and so on. Using this logic, the symbols in the book decoded to read Tamam Shud, which means ended or finished. For whatever reason, the book with the mysterious markings was never released to the public and the story remained under wraps until the 1970s. But once the case reopened, the phone number became a focal point for investigators. Unfortunately, it didn't take them very long to learn that the line was disconnected. But in 1980, another man came forward to say that he knew the number. He had worked for the military at the time and confirmed that it belonged to a Major Claude Churchill, who had been stationed at an airbase not far from where the man's body was found. Major Churchill had since retired and lived in New Zealand. With a new lead in hand, the police tracked him down. When they asked him about the number, Churchill said that he must have given it to someone because he had no memory of ever speaking with the Somerton man. To make matters worse, the man had changed his phone number at least twice and moved residences 4 times since 1948. So he had little hope of finding the man, if alive, or learning anything about the case. And yet, somehow, despite the passage of 30 years, the trail went cold yet again. For decades, the Somerton man case sat on the shelf, collecting dust. But in 2021, a group of amateur sleuths decided it deserved a second look. They partnered with Australian scientists who used modern technology to analyze evidence gathered from the crime scene, starting with the man's clothes. One of the researchers said that the fabric was consistent with clothing manufactured in the early 1940s, which roughly aligned with the timeline set by the pathologist nearly a half-century earlier. But perhaps the most surprising development came from the reanalysis of the Somerton man's hair. Using polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, a technique which allows scientists to copy small fragments of DNA over and over again until there's enough to sequence, researchers managed to pull a full genetic profile from the strands. The results were shocking. The man's DNA did not match anyone in the National Australian Database, and he did not share a genetic profile with any of the 12 living relatives who volunteered to participate in the study. And while this may seem like a huge disappointment, it's really quite promising. If the DNA doesn't match anyone in Australia, then it means the Somerton man was born overseas. This is supported by his facial features, which indicate a Middle Eastern or Mediterranean origin. And this makes sense considering the book and the Persian writing found in his pocket. But where exactly did he come from? Well, that's still a mystery, but one that might not remain unsolved for long. Scientists are hopeful that by posting the man's DNA profile to a public database, they will eventually find someone who matches, hopefully providing the first clue as to who he was and how he ended up dead on the shores of Somerton Beach. And now, we want to hear from you. What do you think happened to the Somerton man? Was he a lost soul, a spy, or a man trying to erase his past? Let us know your theories in the comments below. Thank you for watching.